Hi, I'm cutting firewood for next winter. Over the years I've learned there's a lot more to making good firewood than meets the eye. Like most people, I've had to put up with less than perfect wood and grumbled about it in the middle of winter when there was nothing I could do about it. Before dealing with how to prepare firewood, let's talk for a minute about one of the first issues that arises. What tree species makes the best firewood? Come on, Morley. Dense hardwoods like maple and oak have a higher energy content per cord, so they release more heat per firebox load. They also produce long-lasting fires and coal beds. That's why hardwoods have traditionally been considered the preferred firewood, especially in central and eastern Canada. But most people who heat with wood in the coldest parts of Canada have only softwoods like spruce and pine to burn, and they still manage to stay warm. Softer woods like pine, spruce, and poplar are less dense, burn faster, and do not produce the long-lasting coal bed when burned. Softwoods make excellent fuel for spring and fall when heat demand is lower. Also, the newer advanced technology wood stoves, fireplaces, and furnaces can function well with a wider variety of wood species because of their better control over the combustion process than older conventional stoves. Regardless of the type of wood you're processing, the first step is to make sure the pieces are the right length for your stove. I figure the right length is about 7.5 centimeters, or maybe 3 inches shorter than the firebox. Let me show you how to use the chainsaw bar as a guide to measure the pieces so they all end up the same length. Watch this. You may wonder why I cut my firewood so short. I've had a couple of reasons. First is that I like to be able to load my wood north-south in the firebox or east-west, depending on the kind of fire I'm building. North-south for high-output, long-burning fires for overnight in cold weather, and east-west for low-output, long-burning fires for overnight in the spring and fall. The second reason I like short wood is because it's so easy to handle. I need to split some of this wood now. I'll meet you at the splitter. A hydraulic splitter sure makes short work of a pile of wood. They're especially useful for gnarly hardwoods with lots of knots and twisted grain. But for straight grain wood, a splitting maul works just as well. Let me show you. I'm splitting poplar today, which is soft and easy to split. This maul is like an axe, but with a heavy, blunt head. Once you get it moving, it hits the wood with enough force to split it. The idea of splitting wood is to make pieces the right size for convenient fire building. In general, the larger the stove, furnace, or fireplace, and the colder the weather, the larger the pieces of wood can be. But regardless of what you burn your firewood in, it's best to have a variety of piece sizes. I like to use a range of piece sizes from about 7.5 centimeters or 3 inches in diameter to no more than 15 centimeters or 6 inches measured across the end. Pieces any larger than 6 inches across are hard to fit into the medium-sized wood stove that heats our house. And large logs tend to smolder in the fire for a long time before igniting. In general, commercial firewood is not split small enough for today's smaller stoves. Most commercial wood is about this size. For my stove, and for almost all modern stoves, this piece should be split again to be the right size for convenient stoking. As well as being more convenient to use, I find smaller firewood much easier to handle. I like to be able to pick up and throw each piece one-handed. I find processing and handling firewood hard enough without straining myself with big, heavy pieces. Even though I have to handle more pieces when they're small, each one is lighter and easier to manage. Okay, let's stack some of this wood. The purpose of stacking firewood this way is to get it up off the ground so the summer sun can warm it and summer breezes can blow away the moisture that comes out of the wood. The piles should be well apart so the sun and wind can reach them. If I cut and stack the wood properly in the spring, it'll be ready for burning the next fall. But if I take freshly cut wood and stack it in a woodshed right away, It won't season in time for winter. I've laid down parallel poles as a base to keep the logs off the damp ground and to allow some air to flow under the pile.
There's a couple of tricks to building stable piles that don't fall over.
When you cut the wood short like I do, it makes narrow piles, so you need some tricks to keep them upright. The most important part is to get the base of the pile solid and stable. I do that by using these pie-shaped pieces to form the base and save any unsplit rounds for higher in the pile. These split pieces wedge together as the pile rises, making it more stable.
To make vertical ends for your piles, there's a couple of options.
You can build a sort of column on the end by crisscrossing pieces like this. But this approach leaves a lot of airspace in the crisscross part, and if you don't build them very carefully, they can fall apart. The alternative, which I prefer, is to drive a stake into the ground at the end of the pile and use twine to tie it back into the pile. This produces a stable end that's just as densely packed as the rest of the pile. Propping sticks against the sides of your piles is a good idea, especially when you cut your wood 16 inches or less, making for narrow piles. Without props like these, a strong wind could blow the piles over. It's a good idea to cover the top of the firewood stack to prevent rain from soaking the core of the pile. Covers are especially useful in the fall when the wood must be moved to winter storage. Heavy rains at that time of year can mean a woodshed full of wet wood unless it was covered. After being exposed to the sun and breezes all summer, the wood should be fully seasoned. That means its moisture content has been reduced from the 35 to 50% it contained when it was first cut, down to the 15 to 20% that's about right for firewood. You can judge the dryness of firewood in a number of ways. One way is to look for checks or cracks in the end grain. Theoretically, the bigger the cracks, the drier the wood, but that's not always a reliable indicator. Also, wood darkens as it ages, going from white or cream to yellow and gray. Finally, seasoned wood sounds hollow and green wood sounds dull when struck. The ultimate test, though, is to burn some. If it hisses in the fire, it's too wet. And if you see bubbles coming from the end grain, it's way too wet to burn.
In the fall, when the wood is seasoned, it's time to move it to the woodshed. That's what I'm doing now. I'll just finish loading the truck and I'll meet you at the house. Here's my winter firewood storage. It's the space under a deck with a roof to shed rainwater. Winter storage should be close enough to the house to be convenient and fully sheltered from rain and snow.
You might wonder why I don't stack the wood here in the spring after cutting and splitting. It sure would cut down on the amount of work involved. But the fact is, if I jammed green wood close together like this, out of the sun and wind, it wouldn't dry over the summer. It might even start to mold and decay before it dried. So despite all the work involved, wood must be dried in the open and then moved to the woodshed in the fall. It's also not a good idea to put the whole winter supply in the basement, because having that much wood inside can affect indoor air quality. This is especially true if the wood is still damp or has some mold or fungus on it, which some firewood does. I've arranged this storage area so that all the hardwood, mostly maple and birch, is on one side, and the softwood, almost all poplar, is on the other. I use softer poplar in the milder weather in spring and fall. The hardwoods are better in the colder days and nights of winter. I bring in enough wood for about a week of heating into the basement at a time. Having a small amount of storage inside is a good idea because it allows the wood to warm up to room temperature before loading into the stove.
Well, thanks for joining me on this firewood journey from forest to woodshed. I hope you enjoyed the trip and learned something useful. Try some of the ideas we've talked about. I'm sure they'll improve the efficiency and convenience of your wood heating experience. I'm John Gulland.